My name's Ethan Ward, 39 years old, a man who thought he understood loyalty. For 16 years, I was married to Claire, calm, disciplined, beautiful in a way that wasn't loud. We had a rhythm, early coffee, commutes that overlapped by 15 minutes, a life built on routine and quiet promises. I believed in that rhythm like it was armor. Until the night my phone buzzed at 11:40 p.m. It was a message from a number I didn't recognize. You should check your wife's hotel receipts. Room 614, Harborview. At first, I thought it was spam. Some scam, some jealous idiot texting the wrong person. But the name of that hotel, Harborview, landed like a punch. Claire had been there 2 weeks ago for a corporate offsite. I remembered because she left her scarf in the hallway, and it still smelled faintly of her perfume when she packed it. I didn't reply to the message. I just stared at it until the screen dimmed. The next day, I logged into our joint credit account at work. I wasn't looking for trouble, not consciously, but curiosity. When poisoned by suspicion becomes hunger. There it was. Harborview Hotel, room service, 2 nights, and a name under shared expenses, L. Carson, Leonard Carson. Her boss, the kind of man who speaks softly but knows his words matter. The strategic director type with a perfect jawline and a tie that probably costs more than my monthly car payment. I sat at my desk at the security firm, staring at those 2 words until my pulse started to hammer. For 12 years, I'd built my career on details, surveillance, corporate protection, knowing how to find what people didn't want found. Now those same tools were turning inward. That night, I drove to the Harborview. The clerk didn't look twice when I flashed my old contractor badge from a job I'd done there years back. Routine follow-up, I said, checking archived guest records for security compliance. He handed me the printouts like it was nothing. Claire, Leonard. 1 room, 2 nights. The timestamp of the check-in was burned into my brain. Same day she told me she'd be working late. I drove home in silence. Claire was asleep on the couch when I walked in, Netflix playing in the background. She looked peaceful, one leg tucked under the other, the kind of pose that used to make me feel like home. I stood there for a long minute, watching, studying her face the way I'd once studied surveillance footage, looking for micro-expressions, inconsistencies, anything. But she looked like Claire, my Claire. When I finally sat down beside her, she stirred, smiled faintly. Hey, you're home early. Yeah, I said quietly. Didn't feel like staying late. She yawned, turned her face into my shoulder. You okay? I wanted to say no. I wanted to tell her about the receipts, the room number, the message. But I didn't. Instead, I wrapped my arm around her and said, just tired. That night, when she was asleep, I got up and opened her laptop. She'd never been the secretive type. Her password was the same it had been for years, her mother's birthday. I went straight to her emails, and it didn't take long. There they were. Dozens of messages to Leonard C. At first, professional. Then slowly, they shifted. I can't stop thinking about last week. You shouldn't text me here. Don't worry, Ethan suspects nothing. Each message tightened something inside my chest. My hands trembled, not with sadness, but calculation. Because love dies quietly, but betrayal births precision. I copied every message, every attachment, every timestamp. Then I archived it into a folder on my external drive labeled Client Review 09. Old habit. No one would think twice about it. When I looked back at her sleeping figure, I realized something. Claire hadn't just lied. She'd gambled on my trust and lost, but I wasn't going to confront her. Not yet, because I wanted to know why. People cheat for reasons, desire, loneliness, power. But Claire, she was too careful for something that small. There was something else, and I was going to find out, with the same precision I'd used to dismantle corporate espionage networks. Only this time, the target was my wife. The next morning, I smiled across the breakfast table. She smiled back, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. Big day today, she asked. Yeah, I said evenly. Very big, And I meant it, because the hunt had started. There's a certain peace that comes with knowing the truth, even when it's the kind that rots you from the inside. It's not relief, not satisfaction. It's clarity, a cold, mathematical awareness that everything you thought was stable is actually hollow. For the first time in 16 years, I started studying my own life like it was a case file. I began by tracking patterns, time, movement, communication. Claire's behavior was consistent. Too consistent. She followed her routines like clockwork. Same gym visits, same commute, same morning texts. The only anomaly was Thursdays. Late meetings that always ended around 9:30 p.m. I placed a tiny GPS tag under her car bumper. The kind I used for private clients when we suspected employee theft or data leaks. I didn't even flinch when I did it. That's how far I'd slipped. Betrayal had turned morality into logistics. The next Thursday, I watched her icon move across the digital map on my screen. She left the office, but didn't head home. The dot turned left at 7th Street, crossed Harbor Avenue, and stopped not at a hotel this time, but a small townhouse in a quiet part of the city. No names listed on the digital property registry. Just a shell company address, Arcadia Holdings, LLC. I parked half a block down and waited. The street was dark, lined with trees that swallowed sound. The townhouse lights flickered on at 7:56. Two silhouettes appeared in the window. One was Claire, the other a man's figure, tall, wearing a collared shirt. But it wasn't Leonard Carson. That night, I didn't sleep. My mind ran through every possibility. Blackmail, double life, corporate cover. Claire wasn't stupid. She knew the risks. If this wasn't just about an affair, then it was something bigger. So I did what I was trained to do. I followed the money. The next morning, I pulled every bank statement she'd ever hidden under our joint folder. I looked at the wire transfers, the credit activity, the timestamps. That's when I saw it. Regular payments from Arcadia Holdings. Every third Friday of the month. $3,000. Labeled consulting retainer. Claire didn't consult for anyone. She was in HR. She managed onboarding and payroll compliance. She didn't consult. That word was a mask. I went to my friend Marcus, the digital forensics analyst I used to work with before I started my own security firm. He owed me a favor. Run this for me, I told him, sliding the flash drive across the table. He looked at me like he knew not to ask. Who's the target? My wife, I said flatly. He didn't even blink. You always said you'd know how to find a ghost if you needed to. Yeah, I replied. Turns out she's the one haunting me. 2 days later, Marcus called. You might want to sit down for this. He'd traced Arcadia Holdings. It wasn't just a company. It was a front, a data funnel. They weren't paying Claire for consulting. They were paying her to access internal employee records, including identity verification files, social security details, and private access logs. In other words, she was selling data. My wife, the one who color-coded receipts and cried when we filed taxes late, was part of a leak operation. Does she know what it's for? I asked. Marcus hesitated. Maybe not, but someone's definitely using her credentials. I stared at the wall, feeling my throat tighten. If Claire was in over her head, this wasn't just infidelity. It was conspiracy. And that townhouse, probably her handler's base of operations. I thanked Marcus, hung up, and sat there in silence for almost an hour. That night, when she came home, I acted normal. Dinner, small talk, a glass of wine. She told me she was exhausted, that the project at work was taking its toll. Then she reached across the table, touched my hand. I'm glad you've been so understanding lately, she said softly. I almost laughed. Understanding? If only she knew that I had copies of every document she'd stolen, every encrypted email, every false transaction. But I wasn't ready to strike. Not yet. I wanted to know who was pulling her strings, who she was protecting, and what they wanted with her, with us, because I had a feeling it wasn't about money. It was about leverage. The next day, I planted a miniature audio device in her purse, small enough to avoid detection, but powerful enough to transmit through short range. By that night, I was listening to her whisper in the dark. "I told you I can't keep this up much longer." He's starting to notice. Pause. "No, I didn't tell him anything. But if this goes wrong, we're both screwed," a man's voice replied, low and calm. "You knew the risk. Just keep your mouth shut until we're done. You don't want him finding out who really signed those contracts." My pulse spiked. Contracts. There it was, the missing piece. Claire wasn't cheating with Leonard or anyone else. She was part of something signed, sealed, and buried deep in company data, and it somehow involved me. Because those contracts, they were mine. I closed the laptop, sat in silence, and realized something horrifying. The affair was never about love or lust. It was about covering tracks. And now, they were using my wife to erase me. I didn't go to work for 2 days after that night. I told my assistant I was sick, told my clients I was traveling, told myself I just needed time to breathe. But in truth, I was hunting. When your life has been built on precision, on spotting lies before they become consequences, betrayal isn't something you simply process. You dissect it piece by piece, until you can see every wire, every nerve, every motive hiding underneath. And that's exactly what I did with Claire. The first thing I realized was that the contracts the mystery man mentioned weren't random. They had to connect to my own company, a small security firm I'd built over 15 years, specializing in data recovery and breach protection. I started pulling archived files from our closed projects, scanning for anything that could have been tampered with or reissued. It took 3 hours to find it, a cluster of encrypted archives labeled Reclaim 47. The timestamp was wrong. It had been modified 3 months ago. 3 months. The exact time Claire's late nights started. When I decrypted the file, I felt my chest tighten. It wasn't client data. It was a contract, signed, notarized document linking my firm to an offshore company, Arcadia Holdings, except I had never signed it. The signature was mine, perfect, identical, but forged, and there was Claire's signature too, right below mine. I stared at the page for minutes that felt like hours. My name, her name, both tangled in a contract I'd never seen, connecting us to a shell company involved in illegal data sales. If anyone traced this, they wouldn't see Claire's secret meetings. They'd see me, the husband, the business owner, the primary signatory. She wasn't just betraying me, she was framing me. I didn't rage. I didn't scream. I didn't even move for a long time. Because when you've been betrayed that completely, emotion doesn't come as fire, it comes as ice. I decided right there. I wasn't going to confront her. I wasn't going to accuse her. Not until I could destroy every part of the trap they'd built for me and make her see exactly what she'd done. The next step was to infiltrate her digital trail. I used an old device I'd built years ago, a passive network interceptor disguised as a portable charger. It copied all network packets within a 10-meter range and stored them. The plan was simple: drop it into her office bag, retrieve it the next night, and listen. That evening, she came home smiling, tired, but glowing with that fake exhaustion I'd grown used to. I made her dinner. We talked about nothing, and she went upstairs to shower. I slipped the device into her bag. Over the next few days, I played the role of the husband she thought she still controlled. I sent her lunch at work. I texted her good morning. I even asked how her project was going. But every night, when she fell asleep, I sat in the garage, listening to the data logs, conversations, login attempts, IP traces, phone pings. By the 4th night, I heard his voice again. The handler, this time clearer. "Everything's almost done. He'll take the fall when they audit the accounts. You'll get your cut. Just keep quiet." Claire hesitated before answering. "You promised it wouldn't go this far." "Promises change. You want out, you vanish. But you don't talk. Understand?" I paused the recording and sat back, staring into the dim light of my workshop. This wasn't just betrayal anymore. It was premeditation. She was being manipulated, maybe even blackmailed, but she had signed that contract. She had known. And now she was helping a ghost organization erase me from my own life. The more I uncovered, the clearer it became that Arcadia Holdings was part of something bigger, a corporate laundering system that moved stolen identity data through fake consulting firms. They'd use real businesses like mine as legal buffers. Once everything was in place, they'd frame the company owner, then disappear with the money and the data, the perfect setup. And Claire was their inside guarantee. I started planning my counterattack like a chess match. Every move had to be precise, silent, and irreversible. First, I created a parallel paper trail of fake documents that proved I'd been investigating Arcadia Holdings for months. Dated emails, confidential memos, encrypted backups. I wanted anyone who looked later to believe I was the whistleblower, not the culprit. Then I copied every file from her personal laptop and synced them to an isolated drive. The evidence was damning: hidden payments, encrypted messages, offshore deposits, and that same handler's number registered under a burner name, G. Lake. I remember the night I almost confronted her. She was sitting by the window, sipping wine, scrolling her phone. The glow from the screen lit her face just enough to make her look innocent. If I hadn't known, I would have believed it. That was the hardest part, realizing how well she'd played her role. I walked past her pretending to get a drink, and she smiled. "Rough day." "Same as always," I said. And in that moment, I realized something terrifying. I didn't love her anymore. Whatever had existed between us had been replaced by calculation, by the cold rhythm of revenge building in my chest. The next morning, I left for the office early. Before leaving, I unplugged the Wi-Fi router, inserted a small tracking module, and reconnected it. Now, every message she sent, encrypted or not, was being mirrored to my system. By 10 a.m., I saw the message that changed everything. From Claire H. 2 J. Lake at ArcadiaHoldings.io. "He's asking questions. We need to move faster." A reply came instantly. "Then it's time. He's already compromised. We'll finalize the drop next week. Don't get emotional now. Finalize the drop." I didn't need Marcus or any analyst to tell me what that meant. They were about to execute the final phase, transferring stolen data and locking the evidence to my digital identity. That was the week my life was supposed to end, but they didn't know who they were playing with. I wasn't going to stop them. Not yet. I was going to let them finish their plan, and then I'd rewrite the ending myself. It's strange how calm revenge feels when it finally settles inside you. People think it's chaos, screaming, destruction, rage. But it isn't. It's quiet, precise, cold. That's how it felt in the days that followed. Like I'd crossed a line and could never go back. By the time Claire's project was nearing its end, my plan was already in motion. Every lie she told me was a thread, and I was pulling them one by one until the entire fabric of her deceit came apart. That Friday morning, she kissed me before work. "Big day today," she said, smiling, pretending to be nervous. "Yeah," I replied, "for both of us." I watched her drive away, and for the first time in months, I didn't feel the usual sting of loss or anger. Just focus. I had everything I needed: evidence, backups, recordings, and the digital skeletons of her new friends at Arcadia Holdings. What they didn't know was that I had rewritten the game's rules. The first step was bait. I created a dummy email chain between myself and a fake government contact, Agent Reynolds, a persona I built using real agency metadata from my cybersecurity archives. The messages hinted that I was cooperating in a federal investigation into offshore laundering networks. Then I leaked that fake correspondence through Claire's work laptop, quietly, automatically. When she synced her system that afternoon, the files embedded themselves in her outgoing data cache, which meant that by nightfall, her handlers would see the same thing I wanted them to see: that Claire's husband was working with the authorities and preparing to expose them. I spent that entire day watching her phone traffic, By 2:15 p.m., I saw a new encrypted connection ping her device. J. Lake again. It lasted only 43 seconds, but it was enough. The message was clear. They were scared, and scared people make mistakes. That evening, she came home early, a rarity. She walked into the kitchen with a forced smile, her hands trembling as she poured herself wine. "You okay?" I asked, pretending not to notice. "Yeah," she said quickly. "Just tired. Long day." I nodded. "I know the feeling." She drank the wine in silence. Her eyes darted to her phone every few seconds, waiting for a message that didn't come. That's when I knew they were pulling away. Arcadia was cutting her loose. And once they did, I'd have everything I needed to end this. That night I went to the garage, locked the door, and began my final move. Using her network traffic logs, I traced the Arcadia servers to an abandoned routing hub in Denver, a small data facility that had been deregistered 2 years ago. The perfect hideout for stolen information. I cloned the access credentials from Claire's account, patched into their virtual network, and watched as their operations unfolded in real time. There it was, folder name transfer_finals, filled with terabytes of stolen client data and one encrypted document labeled e.hawthorne_liability_proof. They single quotes D. Finished setting me up. But when they executed their final upload the next morning, they wouldn't be sending stolen data to their offshore accounts. They'd be sending it straight to the FBI cybercrime unit with their real signatures attached. The switch required exact timing. I had to let Claire initiate the process herself, believing she was completing the mission. Otherwise, the data wouldn't match her access keys. So I waited, watched, planned. Saturday morning came quietly. She was distant, barely speaking, lost in her own guilt or panic. I couldn't tell which. She left the house at 8:30 a.m., heading to the office. I followed 20 minutes later, tracking her GPS through a cloned signal. When she parked outside her company building, I stayed 2 blocks away, watching her enter. Through my laptop, I saw her credentials log into the Arcadia network. User Claire.h at arcadiaholdings.io session. Initiated action. Data transfer. Executed. Screen blinked. A progress bar appeared: -12%, 43%, 78%, 100%. Then it was done. Except, not the way she thought, because when she clicked send, my mirrored script rerouted the upload, masking it through a proxy, one that sent the entire operation log, including her emails, transfers, and voice calls, straight to a federal server in Quantico. Her handler, J. Lake, had just become the key witness in a case against himself. At noon, I drove back home. She came in hours later, pale and trembling. "I need to tell you something," she started, voice cracking. I let her talk. She confessed to working with Arcadia, said it started as a favor for a colleague, said she didn't know how deep it went. She cried, real tears maybe, but I felt nothing. When she asked if I could forgive her, I looked her in the eye and said, "Claire, I already did. I just hope they do too." Her brows furrowed. "What?" Then her phone buzzed. She froze when she read the notification. Federal warrant executed, Office of Cybercrime Investigation. Her hands started shaking. "Ethan, what did you do?" I stood, walked to the window, and watched the flashing lights begin to reflect off our walls. "I didn't do anything," I said quietly. "You did. They took her that evening." No screaming, no struggle. Just quiet disbelief as they led her away in handcuffs. I watched her leave from the porch, and for a second, a single, fleeting second, I almost felt pity. But the story wasn't over, because when I checked the final system logs later that night, there was one file Arcadia had tried to delete during the arrest. One name appeared in that fields: metadata. Jonathan Lake, real, traceable, living in Seattle. The man behind everything. And as I sat there, watching the cursor blink next to his name, I knew exactly what came next. Revenge doesn't end when you get justice. It ends when there's nothing left inside you but silence. And I wasn't there yet. Claire was gone, arrested, processed, and indicted under federal cybercrime statutes. Her name hit the headlines 2 days later. Local executive implicated in data laundering scandal. The story painted her as a corporate accomplice who unknowingly participated in a global identity theft ring. They called her a victim of manipulation. That part burned the most, because I'd seen the messages. I'd heard her voice. She hadn't been manipulated. She'd been greedy, but she wasn't the architect. That was Jonathan Lake, and I wasn't done until I faced him. I started by tracking the remnants of Arcadia's network after the FBI raids. Most of it was wiped clean, firewalled, or confiscated. But deep in the digital wreckage, I found a faint signal, a residual connection between 2 servers in Seattle and Toronto. Both bounced off an IP address registered to Lakeside Technologies, a clean, legitimate consulting firm. Jonathan's cover. I flew to Seattle under an alias. No drama. No cinematic storm. Just rain, endless, cold rain tapping against the windshield as I drove toward a nondescript office building downtown. I'd learned something over the past months. Monsters rarely live in shadows. They live under fluorescent lights, drinking black coffee, smiling for LinkedIn photos. I rented an office directly across from his building. For 3 days, I watched him come and go, calm, confident, completely untouchable. No one would ever guess he'd built an empire out of stolen lives. On the 4th day, I decided to introduce myself. He was in the lobby when I walked in, mid-40s. Sharp suit, charming smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. When I said his name, he turned slowly, polite but cautious. "Yes? Can I help you, Mr. Lake?" I said evenly. "I think you can. I'm Ethan Hawthorne." The smile faltered for half a heartbeat. Then he recovered. "I'm sorry, do we know each other?" "Not yet," I replied. "But you knew my wife." There it was, the flicker, the flash of realization behind his comm mask. It lasted a second, but I saw it, and that second was all I needed. He said softly. "Claire, unfortunate situation. I heard about the investigation. Tragic, really." I stepped closer, close enough to see the pulse ticking at his jaw. "Tragic," I echoed. "That's one word for it." He smiled again, that cold corporate smirk that said, "You can't touch me." "You should be careful, Mr. Hawthorne. Accusations like that can be dangerous." "Oh, I'm not accusing," I said, pulling a small flash drive from my pocket. "I'm informing." The drive contained everything I'd saved, the recordings, the emails, the rerouted transfers, the metadata logs that tied him to Arcadia's encrypted servers. But what he didn't know was that the moment I inserted it into his computer, it would auto-send the entire archive to every major news outlet in the city, along with his personal tax records, offshore account links, and call logs. All time-stamped, all verified, all public. I'd spent weeks preparing it, and he was about to watch it unfold in real time. I followed him up to his office. He sat down, pretending to stay calm. "I'll have to call security, Mr. Hawthorne." "Go ahead," I said, sliding the drive across the desk. "But once you plug this in, you might want to check the news feed first." He hesitated, curiosity winning over caution. He plugged it in, the computer hummed, then beeped. Then notifications began popping up across the screen like digital gunfire, every secret, every crime, every piece of his empire unraveling. I watched his confidence disintegrate. He started, his voice shaking now. "What did you do?" I leaned in close enough for him to smell the bitterness on my breath. "I just gave the truth a microphone." He lunged for the mouse, trying to shut it down. But it was too late. On his secondary monitor, a breaking headline flashed. "Corporate executive linked to federal cyber laundering case." Jonathan froze, staring at his own name printed across the screen. Then he whispered, "You ruined me." I smiled. "No, you did that yourself. I just made sure the world knew." I left the building without looking back. By the time I reached the street, the police were already pulling up. Sirens echoed through the glass towers, bouncing off the rain. Justice, cold, public, irreversible. For the first time in months, I felt still. Claire tried to contact me from custody 2 weeks later. I didn't answer. Her lawyer sent a letter, apologies, explanations, pleas for forgiveness. I burned it. Revenge doesn't heal. It doesn't make you whole. It just clears the debris so you can see what's left. And when I looked around, there was almost nothing left of who I used to be, just a quiet man, standing in the ashes of his own life, realizing he'd won a war that had already taken everything. That night, I sat in my empty kitchen, listening to the rain again. The city outside was still alive, people laughing, cars honking, a world moving on. But inside, it was just me, a glass of whiskey, and silence. I opened my laptop, deleted every trace of the operation, and shut it for good. I whispered her name once, not with anger, not with love, just finality. Goodbye, Claire. And for the first time since it all began, I meant it.